The following is a production of Cary TV, the Town of Cary's government access channel.
Good evening. We will now call to order this Planning and Zoning Board meeting for the 21st of March. We begin, of course, as always, with the adoption of our agenda. Does anyone have any changes suggested to the agenda? If not, I would be looking for a motion to adopt, please.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. We will now move on to approving the minutes. Does anyone have any suggestions, changes, or edits to the minutes? If not, I would be looking for a motion for that as well.
So moved.
And a second, please.
Second.
All those in favor of adopting the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. That carries unanimously as well. We will now move to our very first case. And the first case we have has a public hearing attached to it. So I'll go through a few of the rules that we have for the few people that are here this evening that may want to speak to that. We're going to have first a member of our staff come and speak and address that the item with us. After that, I will open the public hearing. At that point, the applicant will then have a 10-minute period in which to address this board on the issue. And then after that, we will allow folks to come up and speak on this public hearing. Each person will have 5 minutes. I would ask that you come down that side if you please. There's not a big crowd tonight, so it really doesn't matter which way you come down here. It just makes it a little easier. Would you give the clerk a card that has some information on, including your name and address? And when you come to speak to us, if you would go to the part of the podium on your left, which is to our right, not the one with the monitor, and start with your name. We would greatly appreciate that. And we'd also ask you to be concise. If there's a whole bunch of people saying, addressing an issue, maybe not be repetitive about it, but have a spokesperson or have somebody address an individual piece as we go through. Not seeing a lot of people here, I don't think that's going to be an issue this evening. But I will say that we will not interact with you in any way if you do come to speak at this public hearing. We're here to listen to you. And we won't answer any questions of yours at all. You can ask rhetorical questions, of course, but we're not going to interact back and forth. I would also like to point out that this is the first of a new possible way things are going to happen now and then, where we have a comprehensive plan amendment and we have a rezoning case coming before us. It just so happens the plan amendment has a public hearing, the rezoning case does not. So we're going to go through a good effort to make sure we address only those things in the hearing for the comprehensive plan amendment. After that, we will discuss this case, and then we will render some sort of a recommendation to Town Council one way or the other. So that is how we're going to handle the public hearing. We have only one case this evening with a public hearing, and that is Comprehensive Plan Amendment 15 CPA 10. Mr. Ramage, good evening.
Good evening. We do want to clarify later in the agenda, the rezoning case will also have a public hearing because conditions have changed on the case since it was originally submitted.
Very well. Oh, there it is. So forget everything I said.
So the first hearing tonight is for a comprehensive plan amendment request which concerns 3.6 acres located on Southwest Maynard Road. The site is on the north side of Southwest Maynard at the intersection across the street from Kilmaine Drive. This slide is a zoomed-in aerial, so you can see that the eastern property boundary abuts the Food Lion at Mayfair Plaza, and part of the southern property boundary is defined by the Brugger's Bagel Shop and a small multi-tenant retail building owned by Group Properties. And then immediately west and north of the site is the Birchrose subdivision. Gordon Street currently terminates at the edge of the western property line. Homes on Gordon and Rose Streets were built in the early 1960s, and the Mayfair Plaza Shopping Center dates, we think, from the late 1960s and early 1970s. Mail notification of tonight's hearing was sent out to all properties within 800 feet of the subject site. This site is generally unaffected by any identified streams or wetlands. The town does have a small pocket park. The Rose Street Park is about 0.6 acres in site and is immediately north of the site, and it consists of two smaller parcels. The Comprehensive Transportation Plan currently recommends that Southwest Maynard Road be a 4-lane median divided road. However, the existing section is a 5-lane road for the most part, and there are no plans to alter that. The current draft that will be the working draft of the new Comprehensive Transportation Plan will be amended. It's being proposed to be amended to reflect the 5-lane section. Took a while to get that out. The site benefits from 4 public bus transit routes. C-Tran routes 1 and 2 run along Maynard Road in opposite directions. C-Tran Route 5 goes north and south on Kildare Farm Road and also includes special express service. Go Triangle operates Route 301, which is the gold line you see on the slide, which operates on Maynard and circles around Kilmaine Drive. This site is actually made up of 2 parcels. The larger of the 2 parcels is currently split zoned, mostly general commercial, but also has some residential 12 zoning district. And most of the larger parcel, so most of the parcel is general commercial with a little bit of residential 12, and the other parcel is completely zoned R12. So by and large, this zoning has been in place. This split of general commercial and R12 zoning has been there for well over 20 years. On Cary's current land use plan, most of the site is within the Mayfair Mixed-Use Activity Center. The boundary of that activity center is shown in the bold blue line on this map. Most of the site also has an underlying base land use designation of commercial, which reflects the zoning. And a small portion of the site is outside of the activity center and is designated for neighborhood low-density residential. The Mayfair Activity Center, by way of a little bit of explanation, is one of Cary's 3 sizes of activity centers. This is the middle size. Usually community-sized activity centers such as Mayfair will have at least 2 shopping centers, or it will have a shopping center anchored by a big box retailer such as the Target or a Kmart. In this case, the Kmart anchor has changed over to Carolina Pottery. Activity centers are intended to include a mix of shopping, employment, and housing. So accordingly, the long-range vision for the part of the subject parcel that's inside of that activity center includes a recommendation for not only commercial, but also opens the possibilities for office or housing uses. In general, Cary's land use plan recommends that development of a property inside of an activity center should help to improve the overall mix of uses, provide more of the use you've got the least of whenever possible. However, precise land uses selected for a site also need to meet the town plan's policies for compatibility and transitions with adjacent uses. So there'd be a number of possibilities under the current plan for the site. The applicants are requesting to remove the site from the Mayfair Activity Center and to also redesignate the entire site, both parcels, as office and light industrial, or office IND, with the abbreviation shown on the slide. The office IND land use category supports a vision for either future office or future light industrial, or what we call flex uses. Within the office industrial category, office uses tend to be in support of flex and light industrial space, or to be more oriented towards things like prototype production or laboratories. However, professional office is also possible. However, most often the office IND category is used to designate a desire over the long term for future light industrial uses, such as manufacturing, warehousing, distribution, things like heavy vehicle repair, equipment or material storage, and so forth. The staff report for this case includes analysis of 5 different considerations, and we'll walk through each of those. The first consideration concerns what we call development metrics for the activity center. Cary's land use plan sets out idealized general recommendations for the amount of commercial, office, floor space that should be in such an activity center, and how much housing. So on this slide, you'll see the gray column shows the amount of commercial, office, and housing that the land use plan typically expects to find in the average community-sized activity center. The gold column shows the projected build-out of the center if we leave the land use designations as they are and build out the last few remaining parcels. So this activity center is doing fine in terms of commercial and office space. It's a little bit light in terms of housing within the immediate boundaries of the activity center. But, of course, the Mayfair Activity Center predates the land use plan, and we do want to recognize that the entire surrounding area is developed as neighborhoods that's helped to support this activity center. The second of the 5 considerations in the report concerns the suitability of the site for different kinds of infill development. So as we noted earlier, most of the site currently has general commercial zoning, so we wanted to take a quick look at that. When you consider the types of commercial uses that might be feasible on this site, a key consideration is probably that there's limited visibility from Maynard Road. And you can see in this slide the picture from Maynard. Mostly you see the Brugger's and the multi-tenant retail building. There is some couple hundred feet of frontage to the left of the building you see on the slide. But the visibility is definitely an issue here. So that, coupled with the existing buildings that front onto Maynard and the natures, probably especially of the building on the left in the picture, probably makes it unlikely that this site would support uses such as dining, general retail, boutiques, or corporate office, at least until part of these properties redevelop. But that doesn't mean that all of the uses that could be done under general commercial zoning of the plan are unfeasible. So there are certain types of specialty retailers, neighborhood retailers that could be appropriate on the site, or neighborhood or professional office. Remember, the land use plan would support office, housing, or retail on the site. And there are some kinds of retailers that you don't need road frontage for, that your customer always finds you, regardless of whether you have the frontage or not. Residential uses also could be suitable on the site. In fact, they could be highly suitable and might offer an opportunity to help boost adjacent property values and help with neighborhood reinvigoration. There's a caveat to that, of course, that if this site were to be used for dwellings, if the new dwellings were at an equivalent or higher price point, probably you get a very positive impact on the neighborhood and neighborhood property values, regardless of, from what we've seen and what we've read in the literature, regardless of the type of housing, the lot size, or the density. If the price points are at the same or greater, the new residential development tends to improve and bolster property values throughout a neighborhood. Lastly, we looked at office and light industrial infill uses on this site, which would not be consistent with the current land use plan. Light industrial uses and office uses next to residential neighborhoods tend not to confer in the literature any additional property value. Commercial uses can, and housing can, but office and light industrial tend to be value neutral. The third consideration we looked at was how the site could someday support potential redevelopment of Mayfair Plaza. the site would certainly have the greatest potential. The site itself would have its greatest potential if it was part of an overall redevelopment effort for all of Mayfair Plaza. But we have to acknowledge that presently there's no plans for redevelopment, and it should be acknowledged this site has remained undeveloped for many, many years. The site, in fact, up until 2 years ago was owned by the Sugg family. The Sugg family built the shopping center, and so our speculation is that this is a remnant piece that was left after the shopping center was developed. The current owner purchased it a couple of years ago when the Sugg estate was liquidated. So we show in the light teal outline and shading the entire Mayfair shopping center, including its undeveloped portions that could have potential if they were redeveloped, and then the yellow outline is the site that's in question tonight. The fourth consideration evaluated this amendment in terms of its degree to which it does or doesn't conform with the purpose and intent for activity centers. So the reason the town's land use plan has mixed-use activity centers in it is that the notion is providing daily conveniences, shopping, employment, all within walking distance, especially walking distance of homes. They facilitate travel between shopping, employment, and surrounding neighborhoods. So a light industrial use in this location wouldn't necessarily support that purpose and intent of creating a space where people are walking between shops, offices, and houses. It's really not a walk-to destination. So the fifth and final consideration we looked at was conformance with Cary's policies and practices for achieving transitions between different types of land uses. So this slide depicts the land use plan's implicit policies for transitions between shopping centers and neighborhoods, especially within activity centers. Normally, we would have something you see going from left to right in the graphic, red being a commercial shopping center, and the far right, the yellow, was a low-density single-family neighborhood, in this case Birchwood subdivision. Usually between the two, the policy in developing Cary's land use plan has been to put office in the middle or to put some kind of intermediate housing product that straddles the densities, such as townhomes or small lot single-family. We've had cases where multifamily has been used, but often with a lot of buffer when it's next to single-family. So the request to plan amendment kind of breaks with that approach for land use transition between an activity center and an adjacent neighborhood. We don't typically use light industrial uses as the buffer or transition going from commercial to light industrial to single-family neighborhood is rather unusual. Not that we haven't seen cases, but it is certainly atypical and not consistent with the policies in the plan. Cary's land development ordinance includes 4 criteria to consider when evaluating amendment requests to the land use plan. So 2 of these criteria may be of note. We did want to point out that we do have a dwindling supply of light industrial land, so we appreciate the issues facing the applicant, that especially probably east of Davis Drive or east of Cary Parkway, there's very little land left, and finding spots for light industrial uses is getting harder and harder. The trick is, though, trying to determine what is the best use and the compatibility with the neighborhood. More importantly, the third criteria, changing in any changes in town policies or objectives, we'd like to point out that sites such as this are a central and key topic for work that's currently being done under Imagine Cary on the town's new comprehensive plan. As Cary moves into the next phase of its life cycle as a community, infill and redevelopment become much more important, and how we treat our remaining infill sites offer opportunities or challenges for the town. As we've been working on this plan, Council have indicated to staff and the project team that they consider both redevelopment of our aging commercial centers and the best use and potential for the remaining infill sites to be a high priority. So this is kind of a test case site. It certainly will. This is the future. You'll be seeing more and more sites of the remnant infill pieces that have yet to be developed in older parts of town. So tonight's hearing and action on the plan is somewhat unusual, as Chair indicated at the beginning of the meeting, since under a kind of exceptional code provision tonight, the board is considering, after the comprehensive plan amendment case, a rezoning case later this evening. So since this is a little bit unusual, we wanted to point out how the evaluation of a comprehensive plan amendment differs from the evaluation of a rezoning case. And the main difference, or the first difference, is that the town's comprehensive land use plan is intended to be a vision document that looks out 20 to 30 years in the future. It's asking the question, what would we as a community like to see on different pieces of property in the town 20 and 30 years in the future? What, if we had our wish, what would we like to see? Zoning is a here and now sort of thing, where it's reacting more to what are the development opportunities you're being presented with today, has a different time frame very often, and it's usually very, very specific. In Cary, 99% of our rezoning cases are conditioned, and you get a very narrow, often a very narrow range of uses presented to you. The land use plan is a policy document that's at 30,000 feet. It's really a very general document looking generally at broad categories of land uses. So at the hearing and in consideration of the plan amendment, we would recommend that the question be, in general, should the category of light industrial uses be appropriate on the site, and perhaps public comment can be directed there. And one of the reasons we do encourage that is that in our experience as a staff, looking back over rezoning cases during the tenure of many of us here and some of the board members, we see sites rezoned more than once. We see the plan amended, unfortunately, more than once for the exact same property, because sometimes the rezoning is done, a deal doesn't come through in the end, and somebody wants to submit a new rezoning and change the use. So we have sites in Cary where conditions have changed, or zoning has changed on the same property 2 or 3 or more times. So the land use plan we recommend should be looking at the long-term goal, and because the zoning can change more frequently. I hope that helps provide a little bit of an explanation. So in this case, looking at it where the plan to be amended for light industrial, it kind of opens up the broad question of what would be supported by the plan amendment at any time in the future. So if you've said light industrial uses are appropriate, in the future, if you get a rezoning case for something like a heavy vehicle repair, warehousing distribution center, industrial uses that you would normally think of under light industrial, is the plan amendment going to be supporting those kinds of rezonings in the future? So that's kind of the broad question that we would advise be considered. So the first public hearing for this plan was held on January 27 in concert with the associated rezoning case. It was a joint hearing. At that meeting, 7 citizens spoke at the hearing, 6 spoke in favor, and 1 opposed. Most of the comments seemed to concern zoning issues, where most of the comments were directed to issues of transitions, architecture, buffer. A number of citizens compared what sounded like a prior proposal the owner had discussed with neighbors to do a senior housing project that was never submitted to the town. But those were the comments that were being explored, more addressed to the rezoning than to the broad land uses over time. So one citizen did address the land use question at the higher view, and did express a preference for retaining commercial for the neighborhood. But clearly 6 were opposed and 1 in favor. So on balance, staff does recommend denial of the plan amendment, taking the long view towards the case. And the applicants are present tonight, and staff would invite them to the podium to offer their presentation.
Thank you very much. We will now open the public hearing. We begin, of course, with the applicant.
Good evening. My name is Doug Ledson. I'm the owner of the property. I'm not sure as far as on everything I can go over here, and I say that because I thought these are kind of supposed to be separate issues, and that is the pulling out of the comprehensive activity center and then doing the rezoning, but we've kind of talked about both of them. And these are intertwined. And when I say that, I've been communicating with the neighbors for over 2 years. And my interest was to try and come up with something that what we all would feel was a win-win. And I'll tell you right now that really what all the neighbors wanted more than anything else was for that land to remain woods. Second choice was for it to be a park. In fact, the city even had, or the town had an opportunity to make it a park, but they chose, that they wanted to, that wasn't, I guess, the best use for that property. So with that, we have looked at different concepts here for the neighborhood. I think the key thing that we're dealing with is that we're going from a heavy commercial directly into single family. And kind of as Scott had said, a lot of times what you have is a transition from a heavy commercial use into single family. And that can be some kind of multifamily element or lower commercial use or something to that effect. That was critical for the neighborhood. They said, we're the ones that live here. Said that, I said, well, look, we can put an assortment of commercial on here right now. And they say, yeah, but we really don't want it. So with that, I said, well, what can we do here? And as I said, I thought, well, some multifamily would be a nice transition, but there was a lot of opposition that was even voiced at the original hearing. And that was also voiced when I presented to them a little over 2 years ago. So, I've kind of sat on the sidelines there trying to come up with an idea that would work, that would be a low impact to the neighborhood. I agree with the basic premise, and that is certainly, for the most part, office and light industrial normally don't add to the value of the adjacent property owners. But, and again, this is where I don't know how far I can go on this, the conditions that we put on here, it's for a specific product. And because we put so many conditions on here, it is to try and provide the neighborhood with something that they're after. And basically what it is, it's meant to be a transition from heavy commercial into the single-family residential. So what we're asking for is for you, right now it's a mishmash. And when I say that, as was presented, you've got two parcels that are kind of single family. One's right on Maynard Road, the other one's in the back, and it kind of chops up everything. So we need to have consistency no matter what is done here. But this is something that we feel is going to provide, I guess, everybody with that kind of what they're after. When I say that, from the town standpoint, having some kind of a transition between the heavy commercial. When I say heavy commercial, I'm talking about retail, whether it be restaurants, whether it be, these 24-hour athletic clubs and everything else that are out there. I think there needs to be some sensitivity to the neighbors. And I'm not sure if it's something that you can even consider for taking out of an activity center, but it's something that, we put a lot of effort on. And we're certainly hoping that with that, there'll be some consideration to that. And as far as on the rezoning, I think I need to wait on that one, eh?
Right, so.
Okay. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Would anyone care to speak to the public hearing? And since we have the rezoning coming up at a public hearing too, don't feel as though, oh, I don't know which one to talk. We can figure it out here as to whether we're going to be dealing with the comprehensive plan amendment or the rezoning, and we'll apply a little latitude here. So don't feel like you can't say something one way or the other. So is anyone interested in speaking to the public hearing on the comprehensive plan amendment? Seeing no one, I will now close the public hearing for the CPA and turn it over to the board for any questions we might have of the staff or the applicant.
Well, I have one kind of on not so much about this specifically, but, you know, it seems like there's an issue here with removing this from the activity center and changing the land use. So my question is, because there is an activity center involved, do we still have the latitude to perhaps deny the land use change, but to approve the rezoning? And that way, if the rezoning were to fall through for some reason, it would have to come back through for another rezoning, and at that point, we still have the old land use plan intact. Is that an option, or is that clouded with the activity center?
No, it actually is an option. It's acceptable. The state law requires that the board has to make a finding on any rezoning case, whether the rezoning conforms to the land use plan or the comprehensive plan or not. The state law does not say you have to then vote in conformance.
Right.
The board has a lot of latitude to look at the bigger picture and other community values, opportunities, and so forth. There are cases where you're going to want to approve a rezoning that's not conforming for exceptional reasons of value, opportunity, and things the plan couldn't anticipate.
Okay.
So, you know, you can separate the two.
Okay, good.
Yes.
I have a question. Is maybe going back as we look at the community activity center, I know that it was put together before the current planning tools we have now, but could you help walk through in terms of what that may look like, or the impact, particularly in the residential side of the development community activity center? It's showing now, as I go back to the data, that the usage in terms of the residential component of it is below the target, very low. And what would be different now if that was same activity center was being proposed now in terms of the housing? So I'm just trying to understand the impact on that on that, and from the time it was back in the day to where we are today.
Okay. If I understand the question correctly, there's a couple things to consider. The zoning on that site predate the land use plan we're operating under today for this site dates from 1996, 20 years ago. For this part of it, it pretty much mirrored the zoning. We knew we had this commercial zoning sitting on the property that had been there for some years, and there was opportunity to connect it and look and have some opportunity for some kind of development that would help Mayfair Plaza, that would be a good intermediate use. The way if we continue to operate under the current plan, the applicant or the owner of the property can use the commercial zoning outright. So that is currently conferred as base zoning, so anything allowed in the commercial zoning district can go straight to site plan and development plan, except for things that require a special use permit. But with the activity center designation, and the zoning goes with that, the applicant also has the ability to then, or support, to ask for a rezoning to what's called a mixed-use district under that overlay district that could look at adding housing uses or office. Office actually would be mostly allowed under the current commercial zoning, but if they wanted to avail themselves of any opportunity for housing, the applicant would still have to go through a rezoning process, get rezoned to mixed-use district, and submit a preliminary development plan, which is kind of a sketch site plan that council, the board, the neighbors would all see the actual layout of the site, and that's binding and would go with it. When the site's taken out of the activity center or out of the zoning for the mixed-use overlay district that goes with it, you also generally lose the ability to have a site plan that is binding and goes with the rezoning. And instead you operate more on textual conditions if they're offered on a zoning case to try and figure out what might be there.
Okay. Thank you.
Does that kind of answer what you're looking for? Okay.
Just to clarify, the sole reason for pulling this out of the community activity center is office industrial is not a permitted use in a community activity center.
Exactly. For both regional, community, and neighborhood activity centers, the notion is these are mixed-use, walkable areas where, you know, live, work, play, that you're doing your shopping, you have offices and everything. So you want it to be walkable, and you're not going to be taking up acreage for things that don't have that synergy. So industrial uses were pulled out as not being something you would normally expect to find in the middle of an activity center.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions for our staff at this point, or for the applicant for that matter?
No question.
No?
I was going to make a motion if
Oh,
ready,
well.
but I expect it to be
I don't think there are any other questions. so by all
confusing
means.
or controversial.
Mark, let
Do
me
you
ask one
have a question?
Yes, Scott. Are there any other examples in the town of Cary where you have an activity center that abuts office industrial use?
Ooh, that's a tough question right offhand. I'm sorry, I'm not prepared to answer. I can't think of one right offhand. We can do more research and get back unless Mary or Deborah have an idea.
Maybe near Weatherfield or Country Park.
We can't think of one right off the bat. Sorry.
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I move that the board forward case number, I lost the case number. Somebody,
15 CPA 10.
thank you. To Town Council with recommendation that the amendment as submitted be denied.
There is a motion for denial. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, the motion by Ms. Stedler and the second. Any discussion on this denial, please?
Yes. So as I alluded earlier, I know the rezoning is coming up, and it's something that's very popular with the neighbors, and I am certainly completely open-minded to that. And apparently we have the option to approve that rezoning without approving the land use amendment. And it seems like the core issue here is that long-term, we don't want industrial uses here. But the rezoning that comes up, it's talking about a specific use that, in my opinion, maybe isn't an industrial use. Maybe in the future we consider, a rezoning like that to actually be considered office use. Maybe that's something, because we keep seeing this, and it really is kind of different in nature from, an auto mechanic garage or whatever they're talking about. So if we deny the land use plan, we still have the original intent intact. And if the rezoning that's coming up with all of its conditions were to pass, everybody's happy. If it were to pass and then at some point those people back out, then we can make someone go back through the rezoning process, and we still have a land use plan that says this shouldn't be industrial. So that's my thinking. I'm not slamming the door on the use. I'm simply trying to find a way to preserve the long use plan in case this doesn't pan out.
Mr. McFarland.
Much like what Carla said, I guess she said probably much more eloquently than I can. I guess the short of it is I don't feel there's a compelling reason enough to remove it from the community activity center and then give it a designation for the office industrial. It's just, my gut in short is I don't want to lose the value of having it in the community activity center and leaving it and leave it as it is now. Like Carla said, I'm trying to maintain the integrity of the community activity center and all that goes with it, but also open-minded about the next case that's going to be coming up.
Is there any other comments? Yes.
I'm going to have to say that I definitely agree with the neighbors here in that ideally this would develop as a parks and open space. I mean, I think that this is a great location for it. Realistically, that's not going to happen. So we're dealt with this this change, and for me, I'm going to support the denial on it. I don't like the proximity there, and specifically from our 30,000 view, I really don't think it works with the Mayfield Plaza there. I think that the community would be better off leaving it with the general commercial and allowing for a better transition than what's proposed in the CPA.
Any other comments?
Yeah. For me, it's, Scott touched on something that kind of struck me, is that this particular area is going to be considered one of the high priority redevelopment infill areas, I believe you said. So I think at this point, we shouldn't necessarily rush to a decision and see how the Imagine Cary plan unfolds and what type of ideas and things that come out of that for redevelopment of this infill area.
Anyone else have anything? All right, well then I will call to a vote the motion to deny this case. All those in favor of denying the comprehensive plan amendment, please raise your hand and say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Say no, please. Motion carries unanimously for denial. We will now move on to our next public hearing, which is the rezoning attached to this, 15 REZ 26. Ms. Spearman, good evening.
Thank you. And as you have been discussing, this hearing is independent from the rezoning request, even though they are, or the plan amendments, even though they are back to back. Again, the vicinity map showing the location of the property. The existing zoning on the site is general commercial and R12. You can see the red and the yellow areas. Also, the general commercial portion of the site is in the mixed-use overlay district. Typically, in the mixed-use overlay district coincides with the boundary of the activity center, which is why the land use plan amendment comes in to play with this particular request. In the mixed-use overlay district, there is a specific caveat in the ordinance that states that mini storage use in particular is not permitted in the mixed-use overlay district. So regardless of what occurs with the land use plan, it is important as part of the zoning that the mixed-use overlay district would need to be removed in order for this use to be considered. And then the rezoning occurred to industrial. And again, the reason for the industrial designation, the industrial conditional use designation, is related to the districts within which the mini storage specifically would be allowed. But again, typically the mixed use overlay district and the activity center on the land use plan coincide. But again, that gets more into the policy issues of whether or not decisions are consistent with the land use plan. The proposed zoning, as I mentioned, is industrial conditional use, and there are zoning conditions proposed that would limit the land use to 100,000 square feet of mini storage or 18,000 square feet of office. The maximum building height would be 3 stories or 35 feet, whichever is the lesser. And access to any of the rental units would be through a common entrance without exterior roll-up doors. And since the public hearing at Town Council, there have been a couple of conditions added, and this was based on some comments heard from the neighbors at the public hearing, and that is that the mini storage building, if it's 3 stories, would have the appearance of a 2-story building through having a mansard roof. And also, there would be no windows on the north side of the building facing the adjacent residences, and also no vehicular use area on that side, except as might be required for emergency access, fire access, that sort of thing. And again, this is the existing land use plan with the commercial designation and low-density residential. And the proposed land use plan, the office industrial with removal from the activity center. And again, stream buffers, there are none shown on the site. Here you can see the Rose Street Park to the north that was discussed already. The road system in the area and the transit lines in the area. At the public hearing, as Mr. Ramage mentioned, there were 7 speakers, 6 in favor and 1 opposed. And with the zoning issues being the transition, some of the architectural features and buffers being issues discussed the most. And council at that time did express a hope that greater assurance could be provided regarding some of the architectural design issues that were raised at the public hearing through additional zoning conditions. And the zoning conditions that I mentioned were added in response to these comments subsequent to the public hearing. And that concludes staff's comments, and I'll now ask the applicant for his comments.
Thank you. We'll open the public hearing and hear first from the applicant.
Good evening. Hi. Hi. My name is Jonathan Dorman. I'm with Forstore LLC. We are the applicant and the developer, proposed developer for this storage development. And I wanted to just reiterate a couple of things that Mrs. Bierman has touched on and recap how we got to where we are today. As Mr. Letson has shared with you, he's owned this property and has looked at a couple of different alternative uses, going from commercial, for which it's currently approved through a park, which the town was not interested in. He's looked at some multifamily options as well. And we approached him with this idea for self-storage. And self-storage is all that we do. It's the only business that we're involved in. We've done over 50 of these facilities, my partners and I have. There's 4 of us, hence the name Forstore, and over the course of 30 years. Including a couple here in Cary. We've worked with the staff on prior developments that have gone all the way through successful construction. And we believe that we can provide a very good product here. And so a couple of things that I just wanted to reiterate is that we do have, this is not our first go-round at taking a shot at doing a storage facility. It's all that we do, and we know we will do a quality job here. The second thing is with the location. I heard the last discussion regarding the change to the comprehensive plan. I respect your recommendation on that. But the fact is that people do like to store their belongings close to where they are. It just gives you a lot more comfort. You don't want to drive 6 miles to an industrial park. It's really more comforting for our tenants to store their belongings close to where they live. And so we feel like this would be a much needed service in this location. And the other thing that goes with that is that storage is no longer what people in the past have perceived it to be. I think sometimes people have the perception of gravel drives and guard dogs and razor wire, and that is exactly the opposite of what we do. And that's manifested itself in the rezoning conditions that we have worked with the staff and with the neighbors to develop. When we first met with the neighbors, Mr. Ledson had organized a meeting. We had some ideas that we had proposed to them, including some access on the north side of the building, and some other ideas that we quickly backed away from because we wanted to be sensitive to what was going to provide for the best use, the best neighbor for the neighbors, and also provide the best transition. And while storage has typically been perceived as an industrial use, it really, the way that we develop it takes much more of the characteristics of an office development. It actually does form a really nice transition from a higher intensity commercial use down to a much lower intensity residential. And some of the things about it are that it's a quiet use. It generates next to zero traffic. It's very, very low in terms of light and activity. So it's a very quiet neighbor compared to what you can have. And the last thing I'd like to point out is that we have worked very closely with the neighbors and the staff to develop these design criteria specific to this site. We feel like we've really laid out some conditions with no windows on the north side of the building, no vehicular access on the north side of the building. We're going to provide a much greater buffer for this use versus what would be required for an office or a commercial use, and so we're doing everything that we know how to do and in our experience to make this the best possible neighbor. And we've gotten that same feedback from the existing homeowners, both to the north and to the west of the property, that they favor what we're doing here. So we appreciate your time and respectfully ask that if you can't act in favor of the comprehensive plan, and we understand and respect your reasoning, that you find your way to support the rezoning, because we assure you that this will make a good neighbor and a good transition between the two adjacent land uses. So thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else care to speak on the public hearing for this rezoning?
Okay, I'm back, huh? I really want to emphasize here, what I've gone through with this, and I'm saying with the neighbors. We've had 4, I guess what you call neighborhood meetings, and it has been to kind of work out something, some kind of a. Look, I don't think anybody on this board wants anything put in. When we're looking at what's going into a particular area, I'm sure that you all also think about, well, what if that was next to me? And that's certainly a sensitivity. When this was was first brought to me, because I had another company that presented it to me, I said, no way. Then Four-Store came. And I said, nah, I just don't think this is going to be a good fit. And then they explained something. This is not, as was already said, your typical storage facility. And he gave an example. He said, we've got a development right in Toronto, because they're both in Canada and the U.S. He said the average net worth of the individual next to our development, it's close to downtown, actually it's in part of downtown, is $20 million. Another development that they're going in right now is in Charlotte. Again, close to downtown, where you've got $500,000, $1 million condos going up right across the street. This is something that does not negatively impact values. And the reason being is that it is that good neighbor. And it's not just a matter of, well, we just wanted to get something here that, will just look good or whatever, because you could do that with any type of commercial building. Just have something that looks nice. These neighbors here, because it is single family, were very concerned about the amount of activity. And that's another thing that was explained to me, because honestly, I wasn't that aware. I was kind of thinking what was presented, well, it's going to be these overhead doors and everything. I said, no, there's not going to be any overhead doors. You're not going to see any overhead doors. You're going to think it's an office. It's going to look like an office, but it's even going to have less activity than an office. And that's one of the things that the neighbors became, the whole neighborhood, and we had a bunch of people that showed up for those meetings. We said that at the public hearing that we had here, there is 6 that came, 1 was for, 5 was for, 1 was against. Well, the one that was against was about the furthest away. And he thought, yeah, give us commercial. The ones that are closest to this have been the ones that have been really, really sensitive to this and saying, we don't want this. And even when I brought up, how about senior housing? We don't want, look, seniors are great, our parents are seniors and everything, but we don't want them looking into our backyard. And I said, well, what can we do? He said, well, let's see, we'll work on it. I've worked on it for 2 years. We finally came up with something that, 1, looks good. 2, and when I say that, one thing about Four-Store, and this is the other reason why I moved forward with it, they've got 2 developments that they've done. And when you look at the developments, you think they are an office, because that's exactly what they look like. The difference is behind it, they've got some overhead doors, but that has been eliminated here for this neighborhood. So we do have a product that to me is about the best transition you could have from a heavy commercial use into a single family where they don't want to, where the neighbors specifically, look, the town can overrule this, but the town could say, we want multifamily there. That's it. And, that's one of the things that, is brought to this meeting here is for you all to make that decision. But I still think that there's some sensitivity to the neighbors that's important. I mean, that's the reason why I could have gone with some kind of commercial use a long time ago. But I wanted to have something that would be something that everybody would be happy with. And again, the preference would be a park. That's not going to happen. This, as the neighbors expressed to me, was the next best thing.
We'll have to leave it at that.
Okay. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. Would anyone else care to speak on this public hearing? I see, yes.
My name is Dawn Westbrook, and I live at 204 Gordon, which is actually right next to the residential lot that's not developed right yet. And just coming here to speak on behalf of this project, because you're right. Us as a community, we would love for that property to stay just as it is. The town of Cary is not going to do that. We would love for it to become a park. It's not going to happen, like everybody said. I think we were under the knowledge that town of Cary could have assumed that land some time ago, and they didn't. Doug Ludson now has that property, and he's right. He wanted to do a senior budgeted property, and we didn't want that either. So amongst all of the evils, this is the lesser of the evils. And I, for one, am not opposed to what he's presenting at this time with the buffers that he has talked about. I think, Carla, you said it before, that with his plan, yes, long-term, if this doesn't work out, you don't want something like, I don't know, something that could fix tractors. That land's not that big, and the people would have to ask for rezoning, I'm guessing anyways. But I don't know. I personally don't want anything there, and I can say that, and you're not going to do that. So the next best thing is for me to come and tell you, living right next door to it and what they're proposing with the buffers, I do support it. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Would anyone else care to address us on this issue, please? I see no one giving me any indication, so I shall close the public hearing and now open it up to questions from the board for the applicant and staff.
Excuse me.
Yes.
May I make a couple of comments before
Absolutely.
you begin? Points of clarification. First, as you know, the identity of the developer is not a specific zoning condition, so there's some comments that were made that are not part of the zoning that we could not guarantee with any changes if this is approved. And I'll just leave this with you. These are the actual zoning conditions that are proposed. All other aspects of the plan would be required to meet the existing provisions of the land development ordinance. We don't have a specific site plan that's not included as part of the rezoning request. So just wanted to clarify those points. And also, I would also point out, I neglected to mention during my presentation, today we did receive 2 emails from residents within the neighborhood indicating support for the request. I did forward those to you, but it was late in the day, so I'm not sure if you received those.
Yes, we did. And if I can just pursue one thing. We're in the activity center still. That was denied before. So how do we deal with the fact that we should be looking at a preliminary development plan as a zoning condition? Because we're still dealing with something in an activity center.
Well, I think because there's the, if you look at this independent from those aspects of requirements in the land development ordinance, look at the zoning conditions in the actual district that's requested. And I think we do have some options for you with how you could possibly word any motions you may make, basing the motions on whether or not a plan amendment is approved. And I think we provided you with some wording there to try to help in that direction.
Yes. Thanks for straightening that.
Okay.
First question, Mr. Eaton.
I'll jump on in there. I'm going to piggyback on your point, Mike. I have the exact same question myself. And specific to the zoning conditions, there's nothing in here, and I know we referred to, I think, the fifth condition, we call it a two-story building. There's nothing in here specific to the number of buildings on the site, correct? The developer would be free to build as many buildings as they can fit, given the square footage limitation. Is that correct?
That's correct. There wasn't, there's not a list of a specific number of buildings listed. There is a square footage limitation where there would be either mini storage or office. The reason that there's such a large difference between the square footage associated with those two uses is based on the parking that's needed. If it is developed with mini storage, then there could be a maximum of 100,000 square feet. Typically with the mini storage, you see that in one building, and I think given the constraints of the site, that would, in order to get the height that was needed and the number of floors to get that square footage in, that would be self-limiting to some extent. There could be, however, and I think the applicant has indicated that they would propose to have a separate, like the office management type building is a smaller building that could be in addition, but that's basically accessory to the primary use of the property as the mini storage.
Okay.
Any other questions? Yes.
So on Gordon Street, and I know it was built in the 60s, but there's not any chance that there's going to be connectivity into that storage?
Well, there is. The land development ordinance requires the connectivity at this point because that street does stub to the property line. It doesn't qualify for any exemption at this stage to not connect. When the site plan is submitted, and this is a choice of the applicant, but if the applicant does not wish to connect, then he could submit a site plan not showing the connection and also showing any other modifications or waivers or reductions of zoning conditions, or of zoning requirements, which could include buffers and various types of things to fit the use on the property. Those changes would need to go after going through a couple of rounds of review with the site plan. Those reductions would need to go before town council as a quasi-judicial item before that decision is made. So those are, at this point, connectivity is a requirement, and at the time of the site plan, the applicant could request that that be waived through a quasi-judicial process, but that decision will not be made at the time of the rezoning.
Thank you.
Have we any other questions this side?
So just follow up a little bit on the connectivity. So it would be at the time of site plan that the connectivity would, Southwest Main Road would also then be reviewed by staff.
Well, at Southwest Maynard Road, it's not a matter of connectivity, it's a matter of the access. I mean, access. But when you're looking at the connectivity to adjacent properties is the way we typically think of that.
Thanks. Wrong choice of words, but yeah, okay, thanks.
Any other questions?
Yes. I'll make a motion.
We're ready for a motion, I believe.
All right. I move that the board forward case 15 REZ 26 to Town Council with a recommendation for approval. While it is not consistent, wait a minute, I have too many options here. While it is not consistent with the existing comprehensive plan and all other applicable plans, it is reasonable and in the public interest for the reasons set forth in the staff report and presentation.
Just to be, that's number one on the list that,
yes.
that we've got. Okay, so there's a motion for item 1 on our cheat sheet. Is there a second? Mr. Rogers seconds. Discussion, if you please.
Okay, so this just goes back to, I cheated. I read the rezoning before we did the land use plan, and I like it. And I think it is a very nice transition. To me, the failure here is that mini storage has, become something that it didn't used to be. And when it is built as if it were an office, then maybe it should be treated as an office use, and we shouldn't have had to go through the land use plan to begin with. And I can see that, from all the mini storage presentations we've had recently, it sounds like people are actually using them like garages. I mean, I can see that as much of a use as anything else in the mixed-use district. So, with these conditions, with the limitations to the mini storage and office use, I think it does fit here, and so I am all for approving it.
Mr. Rogers?
Well, from my standpoint, I think what I'd like to add to that is that we've seen an excellent example of a property owner working quite diligently over a 2-year period with the neighbors next door to try to find a solution that is amenable to both parties. And I commend the neighbors and that property owner for all the effort they put forth. It's remarkable. I think this is a win-win. My first thought about a storage unit was the same as I think everybody else's. I've used one once. It was a roll-up door and an aisle of boxes with doors on them. And obviously, what we've got here in terms of conditions is going to mitigate the ability of that type of development. The neighbors seem very pleased with it. So I think given what we've done with the comprehensive plan amendment and what we can do here, I think this is a win-win for both. And it keeps the flexibility of that activity center available.
Any other discussion on this motion? Anyone else?
I guess because we're in the discussion stage, all good points. I'm left feeling like I'm not seeing enough, and so a little bit back to the point that you were bringing up about the community activity center in terms of I would have liked to have seen a site plan. I'd like to have had some answers to some conditions one way or the other, particularly the connectivity with Gordon Street, et cetera. So I'm still, I see the vision, and I see what it could become, and I see that, but I also see that there's enough turns there along the way that, it may not be what it is or what it could become. And so I'm just sitting here, I really would like to, and I don't know if it's too late or if it's a possibility that, it'd come back because it's in the community activity center for basically a site-specific, a site plan and something with a little more specificity than, the conditions. I think they're great. But for me personally, there's not quite enough, and I guess I'm looking for something that's visual, more than just textual, but that's just my comment.
Does anyone else have any?
Well, I'd like to maybe address that a little bit. This connectivity issue to me seems kind of strange because I did drive along Gordon Street, and that park is a bucolic little teeny park that is on one side of the street and on the other side of the street. And the existing setup is probably great for the neighborhood, but this is really a kiddie park and not much else. It's not a walkable park, no dog park, no basketball courts. It's just a kind of a kiddie park. And I would be surprised that the city would want to make a connection through there. So, and maybe I'm being unreasonable in my assumption, but that would surprise me if they chose to do that.
And Wayne, not to disagree, because I drove both Gordon and Rose, and I drove behind the strip shopping mall before I got here, et cetera. The park is on Rose Street, and it has the little kiddie park on one side and has a mini basketball court on the left side. But I was referring to Gordon Street, which is the street that dead ends into right smack dab into the middle of the property. And I don't know if it's...
And if I can make a comment about that with regard to the desire or the preference to be able to see a site plan with that. The way that our ordinance is written, that we could not consider a site plan or a concept plan, even if the applicant wanted to submit a concept plan, which I'm sure they would be happy to if they could, based on conversations. But because the way the ordinance is written, that decision is made at a later date, and any concept plan that's submitted with the rezoning has to meet all the requirements of the ordinance. So if a concept plan were submitted, it would have to show the road connection. We don't have the option for anything to be submitted that doesn't show that, because it's a decision that's made later in the process.
Okay. Thank you.
You are correct. I'm mistaken. I was thinking that Rose Street was Gordon.
I'm not right often.
Oh, I'm wrong.
I'm glad it's in the
so
minutes.
don't feel bad.
So do we have any other comments on the motion to approve at this point? Any other discussion from any of the other members who haven't spoken up yet? If not, then before I call this to a vote, I'll throw in my 2 cents here. A few moments ago, we answered no to the question, do we think light industrial use would be appropriate here? We weren't saying no to do we think this use would be appropriate. And I think, and I don't want to put words in the mouths of anyone here, but I think we were all a little worried about what happens if this use falls through and a small engine repair shop goes in there. What happens if 3 years from now this actual use is put in and it falls through? And it says no exterior roll-up doors. I assume there still will be exterior doors. And janitorial services and tree cutting people decide to use that to store their stuff. And an industrial use would let them do that. And people have the businesses coming in every morning and going out every night and all that stuff. And so we were worried about that. This particular use, though, with all the work that went into it, wasn't what we were specifically looking at. We were looking, as we were asked, more 30,000 feet, more down the road, as sort of to protect the neighborhood of how things would go. This is going to be a number of decisions council is going to have to think about, and they're going to have to approve something perhaps that's inconsistent with the plan, and will have to go on record for that. So there's a lot of steps that need to happen where people will go on record, think about it, deliberate it, and then say yes or no. And what keeps coming back to me is probably the most important thing that will be floating around in those decision makers' minds will be how many of the neighbors who are directly impacted by this are okay with it. That carries a lot of weight. At least in my mind it does. These are the folks whose property values get affected by what's next door. These are the people who hear the noise in the morning and in the evening. And they're saying, of all the things that could happen, we'll take this one. And I think that has mattered a lot to us up here on the board. And again, I don't want to speak for anyone other than myself. We couldn't employ that too much when we were looking at the comprehensive plan amendment, but boy, did it matter in the rezoning. And for that reason, I'm supporting it, as I'm sure we'll find out in a second or two how many others are as well. Unless there's anything else, I'll get off my soapbox and say, would all those in favor of approving this rezoning please raise your hand and say aye? Aye. Is anyone opposed? Please say no.
Opposed.
We have one. Mr. McFarland votes no, so we are, what's this, 6-1, and the motion does indeed pass. Thank you very much. We will now move to our cases without a public hearing. They're not that much different as far as the staff and the applicant goes. It's just that we will not be talking with anyone from the public, and we will, of course, ask questions of the staff and render a decision after that. Our first one is 15 REZ 31, and Ms. Grannon's with us now. Hello.
Thank you. Good evening. This is a request for rezoning for property located at 7001 Indian Wells Road on 1.71 acres. Property shown here on the south side of Indian Wells Road. Slightly impacted by a stream buffer, according to Cary's most recent GIS maps, and field determination would be required at the time of development plan review. This shows you the location of existing and proposed greenway trails in the general vicinity of the subject property. Indian Wells Road is partially a collector up to the point where it intersects with Wakena Road. Going to the south, that's where the collector status continues, and the portion in front of the subject property would be a local street. Closest transit route is on NC 55 highway. The land use plan designation is medium density residential, and the proposed existing zoning is residential 40, and the proposed zoning is residential 8 conditional use. As you can see by the hatched green marks and the immediate vicinity of the subject property, this is identical to what is to the east, west, and south of the property. The applicant has proposed to limit the use to detached residential and limit the number of dwelling units to 5 on the subject property. This is just for your history lesson, some of the recent rezoning cases that have occurred in this vicinity, so you can see how the subject property relates to some of the other recent rezoning cases that have occurred out in this part of Cary. Property owners within 800 feet of the subject property were notified of the rezoning request. There were no issues or concerns raised during the Town Council public hearing. This concludes staff's presentation. The applicant is present, and following their comments, I'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you.
Good evening. Randy Smith, 213 Torrey Pines, Cary, North Carolina, for a long time now. As Ms. Grannon said, the property is consistent with the neighboring properties. It was more to be able to provide a nice cul-de-sac versus where the plan that preceded this was just kind of a hammerhead and really didn't do a very nice job of creating a model street. And so we limited the number of units down to, I think we've actually only got 4 planned, but we allowed for 5 for this case. But everything other than that should be consistent with the land plan and with the neighboring properties. So I appreciate your consideration.
Thank you. Now it's time to open up for questions to the staff or the applicant. I'm looking to my left. Does anyone have anything here? No. To my right? Well, would someone care to make a motion? I suppose I look to my left again for that.
I have a motion. Change it up a little. I move that the board forward case number 15 REZ 31 to Town Council with a recommendation for approval, as it is consistent with the comprehensive plan and all other applicable plans, and is reasonable and in the public interest for the reasons set forth in the staff report and presentation.
There's a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All right, Mr. Eads.
So this was a pretty easy one for me. I definitely think it's a slam dunk. I really like the density. I think it provides a natural continuation of the surrounding zonings, and therefore I'm in support of it.
Mr. McFarland?
I'd say the same. I mean, it fills out the space there with all the incompatibility, and they're not trying to put more on there than is reasonable.
Who besides me is really glad this didn't kick off a traffic study?
Or an issue with schools.
This is one of those last to the party kind of deals. So, anyone else? Then all in favor of this rezoning, please say aye. Aye. Is anyone opposed? Motion carries unanimously. We are now on to our last case of the evening. 15 REZ 27. Ms. Grannon again.
Thank you. This is a request for 1.3 acres located at 2304 Piney Plains Road. Subject property is shown here, highlighted in yellow. Aerial view shows the property is currently vacant. It is not impacted by any stream buffers or floodways according to our most recent GIS maps. And this shows you the location of existing and proposed greenway trails in the general vicinity of the property. The property fronts Piney Plains Road, which is a major thoroughfare. And there is a future proposed C-Tran route along this road. The land use plan designation is medium density residential. The existing zoning is residential 40, and the applicant has proposed residential 20 zoning. In evaluating the proposal, staff looked not only at some of the existing residential 20 in the vicinity of the subject property, but also the fact that there are a number of residential 40 zoned lots that are less than 40,000 square feet. So what's been proposed with a 20,000 square foot minimum would be consistent with those, and it also makes a transition to the transitional residential property to the west of the property. The dimensional standards for R20 would set a maximum density at 2.17 dwelling units per acre, a minimum lot size of 20,000 square feet, a minimum lot width of 90 feet, and the lot width is really the issue why the rezoning was necessary. There was enough land area for 2 lots, but not enough width. So in order to put 2 homes on the property, the applicant had to seek a rezoning in order to be able to have 2 90-foot wide lots. There would be a roadway setback of 50 feet because of it fronting a thoroughfare, side yard setback of 10 feet, and a rear yard setback of 25 feet. Property owners within 800 feet of the subject property were notified. There were no comments or concerns raised by adjacent property owners and no issues raised during the public hearing. I have not seen the applicant tonight. They're representing themselves. The property owners are representing themselves. So I don't believe they knew that they had another opportunity to speak to you tonight. But if they're not here, which I don't believe they are, I'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
I see no applicant.
Yep.
Anyone?
Yep.
Nope. All right, does anyone have any questions for Ms. Grant?
I just think it's kind of interesting because here's another case where this doesn't meet the land use plan. Right? It doesn't, right?
With medium density residential,
right,
correct.
3 to 8, okay.
Mm-hmm.
I have one question about, and I don't even know if it's appropriate, but the comments during the public hearing in the beginning from council, something about this area being...
There was, you are correct. There was one comment from the mayor, an observation that the area is ripe for redevelopment. Some of the houses out here are older. And it's a mixture. There are some older houses. There are some recently renovated houses. Some, there's a lot of activity taking place. But it didn't really send any direction other than to just make an observation to that fact.
Just a buyer beware thing, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Would anyone like to make a motion then? As I look to my right.
I'll make a motion. I'll move that the board forward case 15 REZ 27 to Town Council with a recommendation for approval, as it is consistent with the comprehensive plan and all other applicable plans and is reasonable and in the public interest for the reasons set forth in the staff report and presentation.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. In light of what you said about the...
Yeah, do we need to make some kind of qualifying
statement? Do we need to amend that
statement?
motion to one where it's inconsistent?
You can look at other aspects of the comprehensive plan other than just the density. You can look at some of the other elements. I'm going to get some clarification from our legal staff.
And we are in the process of preparing a new motion sheet for you to use kind of permanently that lays out a few more options similar to what we presented for you tonight for the Gordon Street case. But as Ms. Grannon was saying, you can decide in your estimation that it is consistent with the land use plan, with the comprehensive plan as a whole. And so really any way you want to make the motion is appropriate. If anyone wanted to reconsider their motion, you could move to amend your motion and sort of read it the same way the earlier motion was read about the Gordon Street case. But again, whether or not you view it to be consistent with the comprehensive plan doesn't affect your actual recommendation on the case. It's just something that by statute we kind of make note of and send that on to council when they get the rest of the case.
Thanks. Dan, I'll leave it to you, whichever way.
I'm looking for a little guidance or feedback. I'm happy just to let it stand. It
works for me.
All right.
Works for me. Okay with that, Mo? All right. Any discussion on this motion?
I drove by the site tonight before coming to the meeting and looking that, it's consistent. The thing about the finished product, that it's a passed-over lot, that the lot sizes are going to be very similar to others in the neighborhood, as was pointed out by staff. And I didn't see anything inconsistent with the overall area. So.
And I'm piggybacking on Dan. I mean, there's a lot of activity going on out there. And so I think it's a good use of the land.
Any other discussion on this motion? If not, would all those in favor please say aye? Aye. Aye. Is anyone opposed? Say no, please. That motion carries unanimously, 7-0. And I believe we have reached the end of our cases. We have nothing new business-wise with this new format? No? If not, I guess a motion to adjourn will be in order, and we can wrap this up.
Motion to adjourn.
I will second.
All those in favor of adjourning, please say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you and good night.
This has been a production of Cary TV. Visit the Town of Cary's website at townofcary.org.